Introduction to a NotebookLM review of A. Crossings reading with Robert Blond. By Alan Lee Whiteman. Here is another NotebookLM conversational review of another of my video creations. Some background: I had a private crossings reading in 2014 from Robert Blond after learning of the passing in 2012 of Marianne Carlson, first love of my life. I recorded the reading on a handheld USB voice recorder. After uploading the recorded audio to a computer, I made an attempt at transcribing the audio into a Word document later on saved as a PDF file. From that, I created an MP4 video containing the individual pages from the PDF along with the actual audio from the reading. That video was uploaded to my Facebook Know Thyself page and my YouTube channel on Stories of Atlantis under the Inspiration playlist. A day later I decided to have the NotebookLM AI take another crack at past life stuff, not about Atlantis this time, but about my prior meeting with Marianne. We were swapped sexes in that 11th century AD incarnation. I have some trepidation in this, as the AI tends to still get things wrong. So, expect some text boxes to pop up here and there with comments and corrections. As with all of my prior videos of the Bob and Alice AI voices, be aware that what you hear in this video are synthetic voices. Do enjoy.
We've all been there, haven't we? That moment when someone significant exits your life, and the feeling isn't just sadness. Sometimes it digs up something else, something, well, deeper.
Yeah, like a lingering sense of guilt, maybe, or this nagging feeling that things were left unfinished, unsaid.
Exactly, and those kinds of powerful emotions, they can really stop you in your tracks. I mean, they can even affect your ability to just function day to day. It's such a core part of being human, grappling with that kind of weight.
It really is. And with the usual ways we try to process grief or these really difficult feelings don't quite seem to work, especially with something as intense as, say, persistent guilt. People often start looking elsewhere.
Right, for different ways to understand why they feel what they're feeling, seeking out other perspectives, maybe different frameworks, to sort of shine a light on what's going on inside.
Precisely. And that leads us right into what we're diving into today. The material we're working with comes from a listener who shared his experience after the death of someone very important to him, a woman named Marianne Carlson.
And the sources he shared are, well, they're quite unique. They're not your typical research papers or articles. What we have are his notes and a transcript from a personal past life crossings reading that he had done.
So you should think of this material as a record, really, of a very specific kind of spiritual exploration. It was a method this listener used to try and make sense of his really profound emotional reaction to Marianne's death.
Okay.
And as the notes describe it, this type of reading, which was conducted by someone named Robert Blond, aims to connect with potential past life situations. Situations that this framework suggests might be influencing or, triggering current issues or intense feelings. It's a way of looking at those persistent emotional patterns through a different lens.
So let's set the scene a bit more, based on the source material, about the connection between the listener and Marianne in this life. They met back in 1971 at Oregon State University.
Right. They had a brief relationship. Sounds like it was pretty significant, though, even lived together for a few months.
But that ended when the listener received military orders in June of '71. They did reconnect briefly, around 1976, when he visited San Diego, where Marianne was living.
And the notes mentioned she set a clear boundary then. Told him not to expect a romantic rekindling if he ever moved there.
Which he did. He moved to San Diego in 1977 for his career, but he actually never saw Marianne again after that '76 meeting. Still, he notes her name remained deeply significant to him.
Yeah, and the source material is very clear that he was profoundly affected by the news of her death, which happened before he had this reading done in 2014.
That was the trigger.
That was the trigger. It brought up this significant sense of guilt, so much so that it was impacting his work. And having had previous readings with Robert Blond, he specifically sought out this past life reading. He wanted to know, was there some past life connection feeding into these intense feelings? He was really looking for an explanation.
Okay, so our mission here in this deep dive is to take the content of those notes, the reading transcript, and just unpack what it says. What's the narrative it presents? What connections does it draw between that story and the listener's present-day feelings?
And crucially, what insights or guidance does it offer him, but only based on the framework and the information inside this specific source material. We're not evaluating the method itself, just exploring the account.
Right. We're unpacking this specific account.
And it might be helpful to just quickly touch on the reading method itself as the listener described it. He characterized Robert Blond, who's based in Sedalia, Colorado, as specializing in these past life crossings readings. The idea being they connect current issues back to past life situations.
Okay.
The listener had this reading in person back in 2014, though he mentions Robert does them remotely now too. He also noted Robert's unique speaking style, which you can kind of see reflected in the transcript's phrasing sometimes.
Yeah, we noticed that. We'll aim to explain the core concepts clearly, looking past any linguistic quirks to get at the substance of what the reading actually conveyed.
Good idea.
All right, let's get into the heart of the reading then. It starts with a core premise, doesn't it? It suggests that the listener and Marianne shared a specific past life.
That's right. In that previous life, the reading identifies the listener by the name Satira and Marianne by the name Pargius.
Satira and Pargius. And it places this shared life in a very specific context.
Yes, southern coastal area of the island of Crete. And the time period given is the 11th century AD.
Wow, okay, so nearly 1,000 years ago. And the reading describes their community.
It does. It paints a picture of an isolated community practicing the pagan religion with a strong focus on the goddess.
And this is contrasted, the source says, with other groups on Crete at the time.
Yeah, Christian and Islamic groups who are described in the reading as having a more violent presence. The reading states this pagan group deliberately stayed away from these others because of that perceived violence. So this isolation is presented as a really key factor in their lives.
And within this secluded group, Satira and Pargius, they were family.
Yes, same family unit. The reading identifies Pargius, who would be Marianne in the present, as the older brother, 3 years older than Satira. Satira, the listener now, was the youngest sibling and the only sister.
Okay, so older brother, younger sister. And that dynamic, plus the community's isolation, that's central to the story the reading tells.
Very central. The source really emphasizes the impact of that isolation. It notes there weren't many other kids their age around.
Limited social circle.
Exactly. Which led to, as the reading puts it, limited communication with others outside their family. And this environment, according to the reading, created a strong need between the brother and sister for needing that of a connection. It suggests their bond was intensified, almost forced by the lack of other peers.
Interesting. So let's dig into the details of that past life. The reading talks about why they were there, their sort of intentions for that life.
It does. It goes into their individual entries into that incarnation. For Pargius, Marianne, and the present-born male, with 2 older brothers already there.
And his intention, according to the reading.
It was quite specific to their spiritual context. He came in, the reading says, intending to be in a male form that professed the goddess within himself.
What does that mean exactly?
Well, the reading explains it as his purpose was to understand that the goddess energy, or consciousness, existed within all beings, not just females. It was about recognizing this quality of consciousness as part of the understanding they had at that time. A male exploring the divine feminine within.
Okay. And Satira, the present-day listener.
She incarnated 3 years later as his sister, and her intention sort of mirrored his, but focused differently. She came to learn the goddess within her own self in female form.
So he's exploring the feminine within the male, she's exploring it within the female.
Precisely. And being in the same family, the reading says, meant there were 2 learnings at the same time. His was the softness of connection, of the divine female goddess within the male form. Hers was learning the goddess within her own self.
And they grew up together, but the reading notes those differences, age, gender, they mattered.
Yes, it explicitly says their age and gender difference made a difference in how the relationship played out.
Let's look at those early dynamics then. The reading mentions a point around age 3 for Pargius, when Satira was born.
Right. This is framed as the time Pargius started picking up conditioning. Satira, being a baby, was still in a more, let's say, intuitive state before that conditioning really takes hold, which the reading suggests happens around age 4 for her, when Pargius would have been 7.
And how did Pargius see his little sister then?
The reading uses the phrase part of his entourage. Like he felt he needed to take care of her. And it clarifies this wasn't just a gender thing. It was primarily because he was the older sibling. The source also adds that Pargius didn't have a great relationship with his older brothers, who were much older. So this pushed him and Satira closer together, becoming like a sort of family within the larger family. The 2 youngest reinforcing that idea of their bond being strengthened by the lack of other peers.
Right, that need for connection. But as they grew older, that dynamic started to shift.
It did. Pargius, as the older brother, was kind of put in that traditional role, being the protector of the sister. The reading says he tried to maintain this. It was expected by the parents, and he initially thought it was a very good idea. But as he matured, being male, the reading indicates he started feeling the pull to, well, be more male, do the things that the other boys did, wants to fit in with his peers, explore that side of himself.
A natural developmental step.
Right. And around age 12, because of this growing need for his own experiences, the reading says he began to feel Satira was, at times, a burden.
Oh, that's tough.
Yeah. And the reading notes he felt guilty about that feeling. It says he loved her, but he also needed his own experiences separate from her. So there's this internal conflict brewing between his role and his personal needs.
And how did Satira react to this shift, according to the reading?
It was difficult for her. She looked up to her older brothers, saw them as wiser, stronger, kind of the model for what males should be. And the reading emphasizes she didn't just passively accept a female role, she wanted to become a strong female herself.
Okay, so she had aspirations of strength too.
Yes, and this was apparently supported by their pagan, goddess-focused religion. The reading describes it as allowing females more assertiveness, even calling it a matriarchal system.
Interesting context.
So while Pargius played the warrior, Satira would try to be the warrioress, asserting her own strength within her female identity.
And the reading says this context also allowed her to develop other sides.
Right, her intuitive side. She's described as somewhat psychic, which in that time was understood as being a medium in consciousness. The reading suggests she became strong within herself, partly by observing and, quote, following the older brother around and his experiences.
But despite this, as they got older, they drifted apart more.
The reading says they became more separated. A key moment was when Pargius, around 14 or 15, started getting interested in other females.
Ah, and Satira would have been?
About 9 or 10. And the reading describes this as devastating for the sister. Not because of romance, but because she still felt that incredibly strong sense of connection. And according to the reading, wanted the same level of connection she saw him having with other females. She felt her primary bond was threatened.
She felt lost.
Exactly. The reading uses that word, lost. And this feeling was made worse by the fact there were so few peers her own age. She started worrying about finding a mate later on, the reading says. The prospect of having to travel or marry outside their group was somewhat scary for her.
So Pargius saw she was struggling.
Yes. And the reading says he began to actively encourage her then. Told her it was time to bring out her own strength, to be the goddess incarnate, show her warriorship. He basically guided her to understand she could create her own experiences, use the magic and ritual of their religion to manifest her own life.
Did it work, according to the reading?
It presents a specific outcome. Through a family ritual, the reading says, a stranger from a nearby area came into their community and Satira connected with him. This happened when she was about 14. So a new, independent connection for her.
Okay, so they had this period of separation, but did they reconnect later in that life?
The reading says they did, through family circumstances. By the time Pargius was 17, he'd been married for about a year and had a baby girl.
Right.
And he would apparently enlist Satira's help. She was 14 then with the baby. The reason given in the reading is that his wife was not very knowledgeable in being a mother, whereas Satira had a natural knack for being with children.
So this practical need brought them back together.
It began to recreate that of a type of bonding again, yes. The reading really emphasizes this period. It says, an understanding developed that transcended the difference in age or sex.
A deeper connection.
Yeah, even with their different roles. He's a married dad, she's the single sister helping out, and different perspectives. There was this closeness that didn't need a lot of talk. It was just sort of beginning to get impressed upon them.
But this renewed closeness, that didn't last.
Tragically, no. The reading states that Pargius died very young, at age 20. Satira would have been 17.
How did he die, according to the reading?
It's described very brutally.
Yeah.
A group of Christians reportedly came into their area to kill as many of the pagans as they could find. The reading also states a major motivation was to confiscate that of the land.
Oh, wow.
And Pargius was killed by one of these soldiers. A sword to the neck, the reading says, almost decapitating him.
That's horrific. What happened to Satira then?
She managed to escape the attack. She fled with Pargius's wife and their 2 children. There was a son by then, too. They run off into a nearby forested area to hide.
I can only imagine the grief and trauma.
Absolutely. The reading describes it as a time of great sadness and grief, and it highlights a very raw human reaction right afterwards. Blame.
Blame.
Yes. It says they would blame each other for a while and then to blame themselves, wrestling with what-ifs, wondering if his death could have been prevented if he died just defending them.
Like survivor's guilt.
Sounds very much like it. The reading gives examples. Satira blaming the wife if she hadn't acted so weak, and the wife blaming Satira if this one had not acted like a helpless younger sister. There was this place of blame for a little bit and a bit of guilt about their feelings of weakness, feeling they weren't strong enough.
But what was the reading's perspective on this blame?
It offers a clear interpretation. It says that eventually they understood this guilt came from thinking they should have been stronger. But the reading asserts this was not the real case.
Yeah.
Meaning, within this reading's framework, nothing they could have done would have changed the outcome. Because, as it puts it, it was time for the male to die. So their blame, from this perspective, was directed at something blameless. It also confirms his name was Pergius.
Okay, so after this tragedy and the immediate aftermath, what happened to Satira?
Her life became about survival. The reading says she stayed with Pergius's widow and the children, trying to help raise them in this isolated forest area, far away from the prior village, along with a few other survivors.
Life must have been incredibly hard.
Described as more difficult, the source mentions their immune systems weakened due to lack of abundance of food or animals or fruits or vegetables, constant struggle, scarcity.
How did Satira cope with that?
The reading calls it a very difficult time for her personally. She felt conflicted. Grateful to be alive, sure. But sometimes, because life was so hard, wishing to have left life when the older brother did, life just became more difficult after he was gone.
How long did she live like this?
She stayed in that area for another 8 years, according to the reading, dying at age 25.
So young. What was the cause of death?
A respiratory system disorder. Basically, she got sick. It developed into pneumonia. But the reading adds a nuance. It wasn't just the pneumonia. It describes it more like a domino effect. Her body had lost health overall due to the weakness from the harsh conditions, the poor diet, the weakened immune system. She just couldn't fight it off. And her name was confirmed as Satira.
Wow. Okay, so that's the past life narrative laid out in the reading. A really intense story of connection, loss, survival. Now, the crucial part, how does the reading connect this 1,000-year-old story to the listener's feelings now? The reason he sought the rating in the first place.
Right. And the connection made is very direct. The reading states there is still a sense of guilt carried by the listener in the present day. And it's directly linked to that past life feeling that something should have been done, something different about Pergius's death.
That feeling Satira had.
Exactly. And the reading immediately addresses this feeling, repeating the point made earlier in the story. There was nothing that this one could have done different.
But it acknowledged that the feeling persists anyway.
Yes. It says, despite that interpretation, the listener still felt that this one should have done something differently. That feeling of needing to have been braver or stronger as Satira, and the underlying belief that this would have somehow saved Pergius.
And that's the link to the present.
That's the core link, according to this reading. This lingering feeling from the past, this belief about responsibility and needing to be stronger, it carries over to the present time and present space. And it manifests, the reading claims, as the listener's current remorse and guilt, that powerful sense he feels now that something else should have happened regarding Marianne or her death. The reading basically points to this past life trauma as the root.
Okay, so the reading identifies the supposed source. What about guidance? This is where Robert Blond's interpretation comes in.
Precisely. He tackles that guilt head on. He calls the listener's feelings about the past life situation a myth within consciousness. He's essentially saying the belief that Alan Satira was to blame was not really true. It was a mental construct of fantasy.
A myth, okay?
Then the reading introduces this concept of perfect learning, perfect understanding. It's a bit dense, but the gist seems to be what is, and all beings have made choices around what is.
Meaning things couldn't have happened differently.
That seems to be the implication. If it could have been different, it would have been. Therefore, within this framework, every event, even the tragic ones, are viewed as part of a perfect learning, perfect understanding for the souls involved. It reframes suffering as learning.
So how does that apply to the listener now?
It shifts the focus. The reading suggests these past experiences, the difficult feelings, they're not meant for regret. They're only the building blocks for the listener to use to create present time. It's about leveraging the past for the now.
Taking the past and using it constructively.
Exactly. And that leads to the reading's core message. Apply these lessons now. The guidance is really direct. If the listener doesn't feel strong now, he needs to actively create strength within himself. If he feels the need to connect or communicate now, then now is the time.
Don't wait.
Right. Any fear about reconnecting is framed as a fear that this one has within this one's own self, an internal block. The reading empowers him, saying he can begin to take action if this one chooses, and encourages doing it in a harmonious way or a healthy way. It's about conscious, present action.
The reading also commented on his relationship with Marianne in this life, didn't it? Something about putting her on a pedestal.
It did. It suggested that in the present, the listener glamorized Marianne, put her somewhat upon a pedestal. And it notes that while this might have benefited this one, the listener, it did not benefit the other Marianne.
And how did the reading connect that to the past life?
Interestingly, it didn't directly. It called this tendency the pedestal thing, another myth created within consciousness, but explicitly stated this particular myth had nothing to do with the past life connection. So it suggests maybe two different patterns or issues at play in his present experience.
Okay, two separate things. So back to the main guidance. It encourages him to be bolder now.
Yes, more bold within the present time, and to incorporate the understandings that he embodies both the divine feminine and the divine masculine right now. It's about finding that inner balance.
The balance between
That intuitive, receptive side, linked perhaps to the goddess feminine Satira, and the assertive, active energy, linked to the warrior as Satira, or maybe even Pargias as protector. Embracing the full spectrum within himself now.
The reading makes a pretty strong statement about personal creation, too, right?
Extremely strong. It says the listener has created everything within perfection to allow more perfection to occur, and that he created all the people within his experiences for learnings, understandings, and to face fears within himself.
Wow, that's a lot of responsibility. Suggesting every interaction is self-created for growth.
That's the framework presented, yes. Every relationship, including the one with Marianne, viewed as a deliberate setup for his soul's learning and confronting his own fears.
So how does he deal with wishing the past had been different, that initial feeling?
The reading says wishing changes nothing. It does nothing within consciousness. But and this is key, he can use that as a motivator and a creator to do things differently presently.
Use the regret as fuel for present action.
Exactly. The advice is to shift what he sees in others, to show up within the authenticity within himself, and to say what needs to be said, express himself honestly, even if there's a fear of the other leaving in some particular way.
And that fear of leaving, that connects back to Satira.
Directly. The reading revisits Satira feeling abandoned when Pargias turned his attention elsewhere. It clarifies, again, it wasn't sexual jealousy. It was a feeling of lostness, a type of abandonment. She'd invested so much in that bond and wanted it to continue.
Right.
While she felt anger then, the reading notes she eventually matured, understood roles differently, and found a new connection as sister to the wife. But that initial fear of abandonment.
That's the echo the reading suggests he feels now when afraid to be authentic.
That's the link it draws. It says in the present, there's no role that is going on here other than the memory of a role long gone. The past roles are finished, but the emotional pattern, the memory of that fear, can still drive present behavior.
But connection is still possible, even after death.
The reading insists interconnection is what matters now, and suggests connection with Marianne or her energy can still happen within present time.
How?
It suggests he actively try. Go ahead and ask what the female within the present incarnation Marianne was all about. Use his intuition, which it equates with the goddess within, his receptive side, to listen for a response.
An intuitive connection.
Yes. The reading concludes that point by saying, death doesn't mean no more connection, it just evolves into an intuitive connection.
So, what's the ultimate resolution offered in this reading? Where does this all lead?
The stated resolution is internal. It will be in this one. Finding peace and harmony within this one's own self. That's the goal.
Finding inner peace. And the key takeaways summarized in the reading.
They're framed as recognitions. Recognize there's nothing here to be regretted. Not in the past life, probably not in the present relationship either. Recognize there's nothing here that was lost either.
Nothing lost. How so?
The perspective offered is that everything was created that of gains in one way or another for both of these particular beings within the present incarnation. It suggests that even the difficult experiences in this life held value and gains for both him and Marianne.
That's quite a reframe. Now, the source material also included notes from the discussion after the reading.
Yes, between the listener and Robert Blond. And they offer some interesting insights into his immediate reaction. He apparently said he felt the reading helped put things in order a little bit.
So it brought some clarity.
It seems so. He also voiced his own belief that emotional energy does not go away just because there's a death of the body. It persists.
Which fits the premise of the reading.
Right. And Robert Blond agreed, adding that it persists unless it's shifted or changed, understood, or the thought form is understood, then the emotion's released. Which circles back to the reading's aim: provide understanding to facilitate emotional release.
Did anything else stand out from that post-reading discussion?
One really specific detail the listener noted, according to the source, was the age difference. Marianne was born in 44, he was born in 47, a 3-year gap.
Just like Pargeus and Satira.
Exactly. He pointed out that parallel, the 3-year difference mirroring the past life narrative. That detail clearly resonated with him.
Any final summary points from Robert Blond in that discussion?
Yeah, he kind of reiterated the main themes for the listener. Satira wanting to be stronger, Pargeus' role helping the listener as male now, balance intuition and assertiveness, Pargeus sometimes resenting the caretaking, how they were like best friends because of the isolation, but also how the brother-sister role limited closeness in some ways. He also mentioned Satira feeling like a father sometimes as a child, but feeling bad about it.
And did they specifically revisit the guilt aspect?
They did. The listener confirmed the reading gave him a handle on where this sense of guilt and failure came from. That feeling of blame Satira felt for Pargeus' death, even if the reading said it wasn't real.
And Robert's response?
He validated that it was understandable for a 17-year-old girl, Satira, and the wife, to feel responsible in that traumatic moment, even while maintaining the reading's perspective that there was ultimately no fault.
Okay. And the listener's final reflection in the source material. How did he ultimately connect it back to his reason for the reading?
His final comment, noted in the source, really brings it home. He said he thought he recognized the same amounts of energies or kinds of energies that were present in his relationship with Marianne in this life, even years after they last saw each other.
So for him, the reading provided a framework that resonated, offered an interpretation for those persistent feelings, especially that intense guilt after her death.
That seems to be the takeaway from his perspective, yes. It gave him a narrative that seemed to fit the emotional landscape he was experiencing.
So we've journeyed through this really unique source, one person's deeply personal account of a past life reading. We've unpacked the story it told, the narrative of Satira and Pargeus in 11th century Crete.
And explored how, within the specific logic of that reading, it offered a complex explanation for the listener's present-day feelings. Things like persistent guilt, certain fears, the dynamics of his connection with Marianne, suggesting these things echoed across time.
It's a really fascinating window into one person's search for meaning, using a particular spiritual tool to navigate grief and these really difficult, unresolved emotions.
Absolutely. And while the framework itself, the past life reading, is very specific to this source, that underlying human need, the need to find meaning in loss, to understand where our deepest feelings come from, and ultimately, to find some kind of peace within ourselves.
Yeah.
That's universal, isn't it?
It really is. And building on some of the core ideas presented in this specific reading, like the idea that maybe past experiences shape present challenges, but also that inner strength, that goddess or warrior-ess, is always there to be accessed, and that resolution is ultimately found within. It leaves us with something to think about, doesn't it? If that reading suggests untapped strength lies within us, what potential strength resides within you right now? What could you call upon to maybe show up more authentically in your own connections, even when facing that the fear of abandonment or loss that the reading connected back to Satira?
Yeah, how can you use whatever inner resources you have to say what needs to be said?
Exactly. And maybe the biggest question the reading leaves us with for our own lives, what does it truly mean for you to pursue that ultimate resolution? The reading pointed to finding peace and harmony within self, no matter what's happening externally or what echoes from the past you might perceive.